social. You're looking at the environmental so far. That's a very good one so far. And probably as you're looking at this, probably you can answer me the question, why do you choose this course here? Among all the courses that KEMI is offering, why did you prefer this course here? Any of you, please?
Personally, I took this course because of I was looking for sustainability. What can have an impact in the education system you have in the present and in the future generation?
Is that Mahmoud?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. You're looking at what can have impact in the education and more so in the present and also in the future as well. Of course, this is an area that has really attracted a lot of interest across the globe. And of course, currently, even in research, a lot of money and funding is coming around sustainability. We call it sustainable education, and others probably are focusing on what we call the climate education. So when we look at the concept of ESD, our main focus basically is looking at that kind of education that basically aims at equipping the learners, equipping the students, in this case here, with the appropriate knowledge, the skills, and even the values and attitudes that they need so that they can contribute to a sustainable future. We are looking at how can you promote that kind of learning that is able to change the mindset, to change the values, to change the to make the learners be knowledgeable on how they can contribute to the creation of a future that is sustainable. And therefore, my question comes again, Mohammed, is that what is the what is the understanding of the term sustainability so far? What does it mean? Something sustainable, what does it mean from your end? Sustainability, please, Mahmoud, as I share my slide.
Okay, in my own understanding, sustainability is something...
Kamau, enable my sharing of screen, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sustainability is something that that will endure, something that will stay for longer.
Very good. Something that can endure. Of course, for example, in my field now of business, we talk about something that can continue into the foreseeable future. Is that okay, Mahmoud?
Yes, that's my personal understanding. Yeah.
Yes, something that can continue into the foreseeable future. And of course, some of the key aspects of this, of course, include things like when we talk of what we call, let me just share the screen. Good, thank you. Is it sharing? Is it sharing?
Yes, it is.
Good, thank you. That's okay so far. That kind of learning that, of course, integrates a number of disciplines, a number of maybe subjects, that kind of learning that is fairly holistic, that learning which basically aims at empowering the learners to take action within their surrounding, that's their environment. Of course, with the main objective of promoting the way they think, that is promotion of the critical thinking. We are looking at how can they solve the problems that is within their surrounding. We are looking at those kind of learners that can think about where they are as a system that has got many parts. And of course, these parts have to work together for the good of ensuring that we have a sustainable future. Mohammed, are we together? I want us to go together, please. Anyone who can hear me, we continue. So that's what we're looking at so far. So we are looking at that kind of learning or education that can promote lifelong learning, whether it is formal or informal. Of course, a learning that is relevant at all times, a learning that can be integrated within the curriculum that exists within the country, a learning or education whereby the government is promoting some policies that can ensure that it is part of what we are doing in our schools. So when we look at now the third lesson, where we are looking at the concept of what sustainability here, we are basically looking at that kind of an approach whereby we are looking at how we can meet the needs of the future, needs of the present, without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. We are looking at an approach whereby we are meeting the needs of today without compromising the ability of the future generations to do what? To meet their own needs in that future. So what we are referring to here, our main emphasis, of course, is on how can we promote the growth and probably the development of the economic development. We're looking at how can we enhance social equity, how can we promote environmental protection as a country, for example. So we're looking at an approach that we are focusing on meeting our current needs as we look into the future. That is promotion of sustainable development, a future that will remain what? Sustainable. Of course, the main aims of this probably is that as the people that are living today, we will be able to prepare the future generations, for example, to address issues that revolves around probably climate change. Like I mentioned earlier, is that currently most organizations, most bodies, most agencies are focusing on climate education. That's basically the ESD, because we are looking at how can we address some of the challenges that are coming up. For example, resource depletion, for example, in our world. So we are focusing on attaining a balance between the economic, the environmental, and the social equity. Of course, this will bring us later to what we call the pillars of sustainable development. That is the economic, environmental, and probably the social pillars. Mohammed, can you hear me? James, can you hear me?
Yes, I was interrupted by a call. I've just managed it.
James, can you hear me then? No one should be left behind. That's why I'm calling you.
I'm getting you. I'm here.
Very good. Thank you very much. So, James, are you getting the introduction part of it?
Yes.
Even though you have missed our 2 lessons, now you can understand where we're coming from. How can James, as probably a teacher, is that right, James?
Yes.
How can James ensure that the learners' skills, values, and even attitudes are changed in a manner that they are able to contribute to the sustainability of the future? That is, you are ensuring that you take care of your present needs without being compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. That is according to what we call Our Common Future, 1987. That is basically what we call the Brundtland Report. Of course, when you look at the historical development of SD, you'll be able to see a lot of things. Of course, it's a long story, but I want to give you that as maybe an assignment that when you get time, please go and look at the historical development of ESD. And one of the key reports there is what we call the Brundtland Report. That is in bracket Our Common Future of 1987. That, of course, even gave us the definition above. So when we are looking at this issue of SD here, or let me call it SD because when I call it in full, I may not be able to pronounce it well. So let me call it SD. Do you agree like that, James? For the sake of this class here.
Yes.
We agree.
Yes, that's okay. So I call it SD. That will come out clearly. Then when I call it sustainable, that will be long enough for me. So having said the definition of that, we look at basically the principles here, which again, Mohammed, take us through the first one and explain if you understand that principle very well. Then James, number 2.
Principle number 1 states integrational equity, ensuring that future generations have access to the resources and opportunities necessary for their well-being.
Can you go ahead and explain further? I want to hear you talk. What are you doing as a teacher, probably somewhere?
Okay, integrational equity.
Generational.
Oh, intergenerational equity, yeah. Generation refers to vizazi in Kiswahili.
Very
For
good.
example, we have many generations with the age differences. So once this generation tries to find its needs, they should do something that will not affect the future generations. So
very good, James.
It
Go
shows
ahead.
equality.
Very good, James. Number 2. Thank you. James has gone mute. So we're looking at the second principle of what holistic approach, whereby you give it, you look at it from all the dimensions here. Like we've said earlier, that we have got the 3 dimensions here: the economic, the environmental, and then the social dimensions. So you are looking at balancing all those dimensions so that you can achieve SD across the world. Number 3, we're looking at the precautionary principle, whereby we're talking about you becoming proactive, not being reactive, so that you are able to prevent what we call the environmental degradation and probably other negative impacts. For example, allow me ask Mohammed again, what are you doing to prevent environmental degradation? Please, not Mohammed, Mercy, are you there? We had Mercy here, and we had also Joseph. What are you doing as a school probably to prevent environmental degradation in your schools, for example? Any of you?
Waste management practices and tree planting activities in the school.
Very good. Someone else? Thank you. Joseph, are you there? So we talk about the issue with, yes, go ahead.
I was just thinking about using because to
We can't hear you though. You are lost for us. So we are saying that number 4 is being efficient in terms of how you utilize the available resources. For example, we are talking about using whatever you have in a way that can reduce waste and also reduce any possible environmental harm, so that you can do this as you maximize the benefit that you people are getting. And then we talk of also inclusivity. That means that you foster equal opportunities for everyone, including the marginalized communities and everyone that may be left behind with this, so that we ensure that we promote equitable access to the resources in our country. So the 3 pillars that I mentioned earlier are the pillars that I mentioned there. We have the economic pillar, environmental sustainability, or that's the pillar, or we talk of social what pillar. So we have got those 3 kinds of pillars. And of course, you understand what all of them means. And probably I can explain them briefly in the next 3 slides. But of course, we are saying that when you look at the economic pillar, we are basically focusing on how we can ensure long-term economic growth without negatively impacting the social and environmental aspect. We said you're balancing them. So we have the economic pillar. Please, how do you ensure that the economy grows? Of course, we are looking at the growth of economy here. We're looking at the productivity of the economy. how our country becomes productive. That is, how much are we producing? For example, as you produce more, maybe staple food, as you produce more maize, as you produce anything, how do we ensure that we keep on producing more and more without negatively impacting our social and environmental aspects? That is the economic pillar. And of course, we are looking at how the economy or the economic system can function in a way which is sustainable without necessarily doing what, overexploiting the resources or creating inequalities. So here we are focusing on things like, for example, fair trade and ethical business practices. Fair trade and ethical business practices. We have got principles of fair trade. A fair trade, of course, we're looking at even in terms of, for example, promoting the workers' welfare. We are looking at ethical business practices. Those are accepted standards. There's this something called about the human rights. Please, you can write HREDD. It talks about the human rights and environmental due diligence. We are looking at how does production, probably in farms or in, for example, affect or degrade the environment? How does it affect the workers? What is the impact of the environment or in terms of the health of workers? What are the practices within our farms, probably overworking the employees? Those are unethical practices so far. We are looking at sustainable consumption and production. That is, as you produce, can that production be sustainable? That is, as you produce goods and services, as you consume, is the consumption basically affecting the what? The society as a whole? You are looking at entrepreneurship for sustainability and also the green jobs. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, things are really going green, including even the logistics industry, for example, the transport system. For example, the introduction of things like the easy electric vehicles, for example. That is some of the greening effects that are being done. The green jobs that are aimed at not destroying the environment. You look at even all professions, including teaching, green education, green accounting, everything is going green so far. So we're looking at the economic pillar. How can the economic system function in a way that you don't do what? Exploit or destroy the environment or destroy the society as a whole. So we look at fair trade principles, go and look at that. Look at ethical business practice, for example, sustainable consumption and made production, etc. there. So that as we look at this, we're basically teaching our learners on how they can develop skills that promote their financial literacy, resource management, and also maybe innovation for the sustainable growth of the economy of our nation. Can you hear me very well, Mohammed, James, Joseph, the ones I know?
Yes.
Yes, can hear you.
I'll be stopping. I'll stop at around 6:20 so that Martin comes in. So please get ready for the changeover so that you don't you're not left behind. Alan Torotich. Alan, how are you? Paris, how are you?
I'm fine.
Paris, how are you?
I'm fine.
Usikiki hata kidogo. Ongea kwa sauti kama mwalimu.
I'm fine.
Very good. That's okay. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Kisumu.
Thank you. You can mute, please. Try to mute then after that then, so that we continue together. I think we are doing well. Thank you. So we are in the first pillar called the economic pillar. So we are seeing how do you balance the economic pillar with the environmental pillar and also with the what? With the social pillar. So in what we call the environmental pillar, we are saying that we are looking at how we can ensure that the natural resources and the ecosystems are preserved for the future generations. And of course, here we are addressing the need to protect and preserve the natural ecosystems and also the biodiversity for the current and the future generations here. So what we are looking at here is that we are focusing on how we can conserve water, conserve energy, we can reduce waste, we can recycle, we can upcycle, or even use what? Renewable resources and also green what? Technologies that I've mentioned before, with the main aim of fostering a sense of responsibility and action for environmental what? Stewardship. And number three, we are looking at the social pillar, which of course society as a whole, we're looking at how can we create an inclusive, equitable, and just societies where we are talking about everyone having equal access to education, healthcare, and basic rights. And of course, if you look at most of the probably international agreements, local agreements here, education basically is what? Is a human right, a basic human right. And of course, as a country, we need to promote equitable or equal education for all. Education for all. And some of the practices that you people do, James.
Yes.
Alan. Yeah, James, now, what do you do when a student comes to seek admission in your school? Do you just admit them without asking many questions, or you ask them to pay a fee for the whole 4 years before they join your secondary school, for example?
In our school,
Mm-hmm.
we conduct the interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Then of course, we ask
Mm-hmm.
a few questions about discipline. If possible, we can contact even the former school where it's coming from before we admit.
What is the interview meant to achieve?
Normally, interview is normally for academic purposes.
To make you enter or not enter the school.
Pardon?
If you fail the interview, what happens to you, for example?
Some of them are denied opportunity. Let me say most of them who fail the interview.
Is that right? Is that really right so far in terms of this social pillar?
No, it isn't.
It is because you are not promoting what? Because look at it, James, for example. Wewe ni mwalimu.
Yes.
Huyu ni mwanafunzi amelipewa fee na serikali, tuition fee. And the government is willing to pay for him fee in that year's school. And then you say, because you did poorly, we are not doing what? Admitting you. You are discriminating against individuals.
Okay. That's true.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You are discriminating, is that right?
Yeah.
And
but now,
the emphasis,
my situation, we are in a private school.
No, even private school, you know, the point is, do you have private students?
No.
The students belong to who?
To the government.
Yes, so why do you say that you do that to discriminate against us? Yet we can pay the fee. We're willing to pay the fee that you are offering us, or that your school, you're charging us.
Okay. No, I'm now done.
You're getting what I'm saying so far?
Yes.
We are saying, how can we create an inclusive, equitable, and just society? A school whereby, if you look at the government's focus, for example, we are focusing on, for example, having a school whereby we have both learners with or without what disabilities. Is that right, James? Integrated what school, is that right? Yes, because we want to create what? An all-inclusive society so far. So that as we do this as well, we promote the values of what? Collaboration, empathy, cultural understanding, and even respect for what? Human rights, because education is a basic human right. Somebody's making noise for us. Who is this? James, Alan?
Yeah.
Can one of you mute, please? Please, Paris, thank you. Paris can also mute as well. So we are looking at that. That is promotion of those values of collaboration, empathy, cultural understanding, and even respect for what human rights, because education in Kenya is a basic human rights. And of course, every learner has the right to free, compulsory education in this our Republic of Kenya. Are we together? So that is it so far. And I think with that, I think I need to welcome my colleague in the next 2 minutes. So those are the 3 pillars of what we call the sustainable development. And I think the rest my colleague can pick from there and be able to finish. Mr. Kisilu, are you around?
Daktari, I'm around.
Yeah, so I want to pray that you can start from there and welcome you to this beautiful class. So we have with us very participative students like Alan, Elsie, James, and everyone else. How can I swali before I welcome him? Or let's finish first and then we come back. John is also here. Thank you. Mr. Makisilu, come over, please. Karibu.
So, yeah, Daktari, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
For that intro on the concept of sustainable development. And I think so far our participants now, of course, are well aligned into this very particular landscape, and especially in connecting the concept of sustainable development with the 3 pillars: the environmental pillar, the social pillar, and the economic pillar, and how they tie to each other. So that brings a very good background of what sustainable development is all about. So my session ideally is largely informative, and I will actually now focus on the historical development of this particular concept that Daktari has actually shared with us. So we want to also trace where we are coming from so that we really understand the present in terms of these pillars, the values of ESD moving forward and all that. So my session, colleagues, will be largely informative, and therefore it will be very prudent that we make a following. Daktari has earlier mentioned of some conventions that are really guiding us into the future of sustainable development. So you'll allow me to share the screen so that I can be able to steer you through this particular session. So once you're able to see my screen on your end, then I think you can be able to indicate so that we can proceed. So if you're able to actually see my screen on your end, perhaps you could indicate to me.
Yeah, we are seeing it.
Yes. So I would like us to share on this particular journey, and especially on the historical development of the concept that Daktari has just shared with us, in line with the pillars, how they relate to each other. And therefore, before we come to all this, then of course there must have been a reason for this particular concept that Daktari has tried to tie knots to. And therefore, I would like us to make reference to the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution, of course, is closely tied to the rise of the idea of sustainable development. And for those of us who have gone through history and Some of us are also, of course, teachers of history. And perhaps I know we are all in the world of maybe information, is to maybe refer you to the second half of the 19th century. And here you realize that the Western, of course, world started to discover that largely the economic and industrial activities had some impacts and largely some negative impact on the environment and the social balance. And therefore, from this, of course, we had to take some action. And some of the issues that happened, of course, inclined largely to ecology. The society was largely affected, and therefore the world generally, of course, there was awakening and awareness that we needed to look for sustainability on quite a number of issues. And therefore, based on this, you realize that quite a lot happened. There were some ecological crises that had impact on the society, the environment, and as well with that which affected the economy as well, the pillars. And therefore, when you look at this, of course, you realize that there was the issue of population. Of course, the world population was growing, and this, of course, affected quite a number of dynamics. Because as you realize that when we have overpopulation versus, of course, the issue of resources, then of course, you know how resources are related to population, of course. Whereas scarcity of resources, of course, is imminent when we have overpopulation. Somebody kindly is have their mics on. You could mute. You could mute. So climate change as well. And of course, that is why now Daktari was trying to loop in the aspect of green education, climate education, and all this deforestation, acid rain because of the industrial, of course, pollution and all that. So all these are things that are coming up to affect that kind of balance. And therefore, they had adversely affected on the sustainable development. For this reason, quite a number of course, now high level, of course, conventions, conferences, meetings, of course, globally, of course, started happening. And the first was in 1972, when we had the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. This largely, of course, now affected the social pillar, and this was held in Stockholm. And ideally, being the first World Conference on Environment, then of course now there were the discussions on the concept of sustainable development and the principles on how best we can manage the environment. So now this particular conference sparked discussions on how the industrialized and developing countries, of course, could create a link between economic growth, the pollution of the environment, and especially pollution of air, pollution of water, of course, the oceans, and the general well-being of the people around the world. And therefore, this led now to the creation of the United Nations Environment Program. So this is now when we had, of course, the birth of UNEP. So I think now historically you can link up. If somebody now asks you, of course, about the background of United Nations Environment Program, you can now, of course, know that it is actually the output of the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment back in 1972, which largely, of course, addressed, of course, how countries world over could mitigate economic growth and pollution of the air, water, and the oceans. So that was the onset of, this was the output of this conference, and of course now the birth of UNEP as one of the arms of the United Nations. So ideally, just to remind you that just like Dr. has mentioned, this very concept is a concept about how we can meet the needs of the present without really compromising the future generations to meet their own needs. And I think one of you, of course, was able to expound clearly on that intergenerational aspect, whereby, of course, as we try to live with each other, there is need to coexist and ensure that we take care of our present needs and the needs of the future generations. And this is without compromising, of course, the ability of the generations to come. So we must think in posterity anytime we are thinking about this particular concept on sustainable development. We have to think about our generations and how they will still meet their needs the way we meet our needs today. And therefore, what we do today actually should not really affect adversely how future generations would also benefit from our activities of the present. Daktari talked about the Broadland report, which actually brought about now our common future, and that was in 1987. And this one, of course, explored the causes of environmental degradation, of course, and attempted to understand the interconnections between social equity, economic growth, and environmental problems that globally, of course, the countries were facing. And of course, now there was discussion about the depletion of the ozone layer, aspects of global warming, and other environmental problems. And therefore, there was need for greater cooperation between countries regarding issues of development and resource use. So here, the world is trying to come together to safeguard Mother Earth. And Mother Earth, of course, is being conserved through the environment, whereby, of course, as countries continually develop and utilize the resources from Mother Earth, then, of course, they also ensure that, of course, they are taking care of environmental problems. They're also taking care of economic growth and social equity, so that all of us are really given an equal platform to thrive. So this is the Brundtland Report of 1987, where the countries of the globe came together for a common future. Now, we also have what we call the Earth Summit. The Earth Summit was the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, and this was in 1992. And the major outcomes of the deliberations of this conference, of course, was what we call the Rio Declaration. And the Rio Declaration, of course, gave the right of states to economic and social development. But of course, now it also resolved that we have what we call the polluter pays principles. And here, ideally, the concept was that, of course, country that pollutes, or that institution, that individual that pollutes, should bear the cost of pollution prevention and control measures. So that anybody who is involved in development, of course, should also have a check and balance, of course, on the cost-benefit analysis of each of the item, each of the development issues they are carrying on. So here, any pollution that is coming up, of course, there are costs involved, and pollution prevention and control measures were to be borne by that polluter. And therefore, there was endorsement of the forest principles. And here, prominence was on how we preserve the forests for economic and social development. So that, of course, we take care of the indigenous communities, biodiversity, and maintaining of the ecological processes. So these are the three main outcomes of the Earth Summits in 1992, ideally on ensuring that, of course, somebody is held responsible for the outcomes of pollution, and a lot of emphasis on greening the environment through maintenance of forests and afforestation, which is ideally is all about ensuring that afforestation happens, or constantly we keep on growing, of course, a forest cover. We have what we call the Agenda 21 as another, of course, area of concern, or as another development historically. And this one I talked about social and economic development and environmental protection. And of course, this was to take place through the participation of communities and non-governmental organizations. So here, Agenda 21 ideally now involves the communities. And as you can see now, we are coming from a global perspective. We are even going to be coming to a regional perspective, to a national perspective, and to how, of course, communities and smaller organizations can be involved in the concept of sustainable development. So when you look at Agenda 21, ideally now its focus is on communities and NGOs. And of course, it was realized that, of course, they were underrepresented. Communities were underrepresented in key decision-making forums. And of course, it identified that, of course, the women, the children, and even communities, of course, had a place in the society. And therefore, their decisions were also crucial. And therefore, Agenda 21 sought to address issues that were rooted in local activities by engaging, of course, women, youth, and the communities. This is to enable the concept of sustainable development even sink deeper into our communities. At this point now, you see how, of course, now schools can come in. When we talk about Agenda 21, I have listened to your introductions, and of course, it's like all of us are coming from, of course, a background of the schools. So here we would like to also, of course, pause or even pause through the spanning to the works, and of course, see how our schools can adopt Agenda 21 in championing for the concept of sustainable development, because within this setup, of course, now we have the children, of course, and children, of course, and how they connect with the communities, and especially the immediate communities. So it's very important that, of course, at this level, of course, we see how schools can loop in through this agenda to also address the concept of education for sustainable development. We have what we call the Millennium Summit, and this one was famously known as the 2000 Millennium Summit, or the UN Millennium Declaration, because Millennium Declaration borrowing from the year 2000. And of course, this was a set of targets that were to be achieved by 2015. And they included, of course, environmental sustainability, the eradication of extreme poverty, equality for women, and so loosely we refer the UN Declaration, UN Millennium Declaration, loosely as the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. And the MDGs were actually 8, and being 8 of them, the 8 millennium goals, Millennium Development Goals, of course, centered on eradication of extreme poverty and hunger within the societies. There was a concern on achievement of universal primary education for all our children. There was a concern to improve maternal health care. There was a concern on how globally we would combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. there was a concern on how we promote gender equality and how to empower women. There was a concern on how we reduce child mortality and how to ensure environmental sustainability and global partnership, to ensure global partnership for development. So ideally, we are borrowing heavily on MDG number 7, which was all about ensuring environmental sustainability. And this was, of course, during the 2000 Millennium Summit in New York. And you realize that from this development, when we actually look at this development, you realize that we did not achieve, we had set, of course, some time to achieve all these 8 goals, the Millennium Development Goals. And this was to be achieved by 2015. But there were some challenges that, of course, hindered countries from achieving the Millennium Development Goals. And I would like to share these challenges. We had lack of synergy among the goals. So the goals were not really speaking to each other. There was need to realign the goals so that they speak to each other. And of course, based on the time they were set, and of course, the time we expected the outputs, then of course, there were gaps. And therefore, the lack of that synergy among the goals themselves, the 8 of them, of course, led to the unattainment of those particular goals. There was also a global economic crisis, and of course, for all those goals to be achieved, you realize that there is need for resources, and resources ideally, of course, is what drives of the attainment of an objective or goal, and therefore, being, of course, a global concern, there wasn't enough resources economically to actually address all those concerns. Then the third one is also addressing the first one, lack of interconnectivity between the goals. There was less consideration to environmental and economic dimensions. So a lot of concern did not go to the environment and economic dimensions, and therefore you realize that now, even what we are talking about currently, of course, was not really a major concern. Then there was narrowed focus to equity. For example, gender focus was only explicitly mentioned in MDG 3 and 5. And we don't see how gender loops in all the other MDGs, which should be actually a cross-cutting issue. So there was also some limited understanding about the holistic concept of the MDGs among public health professionals. I think somebody should mute their mic. There was lack of full ownership and leadership, lack of transparency in the use of the resources that were actually assigned to deliver on the Millennium Development Goals, and that coupled with lack of environment, enabling environment, limited funding, lack of policy space for poor countries, because of course, some of these things have to be anchored in policy, political instability in some of the countries, or political goodwill was missing. And of course, now the gap between the poor and the rich, those who are actually in rural and in the urban, made it quite difficult for countries to really achieve the Millennium Development Goals by the set period or the time frame. So then, of course, the compromised focus on climate change and the continued degradation of the environment, all this led to, of course, lack of attainment of these goals. So then, that is the all about the MDGs, and of course, some of the reasons why, of course, we did not achieve them. Shortly, we shall be looking at then if we didn't achieve the MDGs, then what were the options? Because we said there were challenges. So we also had in 2002, of course, what we call the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And the World Summit, of course, was organized because of the alarming deterioration of the Earth's ecosystems. And its intention was actually to pursue initiatives on how sustainable development and the building of a prosperous and secure future for the countries would take shape. So the outcome of this was that by the year 2015, then we shall have at least 2 billion people living with clean water. We should have, or we should reduce the loss of species. Of course, species, of course, is that every family has some species, may it be within, of course, the environment and all that. May it with the hydro ecosystem, or even in the, of course, in our natural habitats. We were losing, of course, nature, and of course, the existence of nature, of course, and therefore the concern was also we address the loss of species, both in the hydro ecosystem and in the natural habitats. So we set up a solidarity fund to stop poverty. Of course, you can see that poverty has been a concern even in the Millennium Development Goals, and it continues to be. And then, of course, we also restored the depletion of fish stocks. So this was the concern of the Rio Summit, also known as the World Summit on Sustainable Development. What were the outcomes of the World Summit on Sustainable Development? You want to remember that we really made a mention of the MDGs. And here I would like now to connect the United Nations Millennium Development Goals with the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And one of the biggest outcomes of this convention was actually to set a series of other development goals. This time, these goals were not 8, they were 17. And this time, we were not calling them now, the World Summit did not call them Millennium Development Goals. Remember, we did not attain them by 2015. And of course, at this point in time now, we now came up with the Sustainable Development Goals, what we are now loosely calling them as SDGs. They are also loosely referred to as the 2030 Agenda. And these goals, because of the challenges that we have just discussed, you realize that there was a clear linkage of these goals with the 3 pillars of sustainable development. So you realize that the 17 sustainable development goals are anchored within the 3 pillars of sustainable development. These 3 pillars, of course, are the social pillar, the environmental pillar, and the economic pillar. So this was the outcome of the World Summit. And just to be very particular, this happened between 25th and 27th September in the year 2015. So I think this was just to build on, of course, the gaps that were identified. And these goals now talk about the future that we want, the future that we want. And of course, it builds also on the priorities of Agenda 21. And Agenda 21 largely focuses on women, our children, and the communities at large. So just like we had our first goal in MDG that was not attained as reduction of poverty, this one now talks about no poverty. So from reduction of poverty to no poverty. as a goal, as an SDG, then zero hunger. You can see all this. So I think I could request one of us maybe to take us through the others. So one of the participants can unmute and take us through this. I think we could request James. Where is James? James,
Yes.
are you still with us? Hello, James? James, are we losing you on your end?
No, I'm here.
Or you are back, eh? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So you can see my screen, isn't it? James? James, we are losing you again.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes,
So
so
I can
just
see
take us.
your screen.
Yes.
So the first one, the first SDG is no poverty.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is zero hunger.
Mm-hmm.
The third one, good health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4, quality education.
Mm-hmm.
5, gender equality.
Mm-hmm.
6, clean water and sanitation.
Yes.
Number 7, we have affordable and clean energy.
Mm-hmm.
8, we have decent work and economic growth.
Yes.
9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
10, reduced inequalities.
Yes.
11, sustainable cities and communities.
Mm-hmm.
12, responsible consumption and production.
Mm-hmm.
Number 13, we have climate action. Number 14, life below water.
Mm-hmm.
15, life on land.
Mm-hmm.
16, peace, justice, and strong institutions.
Yes.
Then finally, number 17, partnership for the goals.
Oh, thank you, James. So those are our 17 SDGs, of course, heavily borrowing from the gaps identified in the Millennium Development Goals of 2000. And here we have said that these 17 Millennium Goals, of course, are all anchored in the 3 pillars of sustainable development. Of course, that touch on the society, social pillar, the environmental pillar, and the economic pillar. So I think you can now see, you can now trace the historical development of actually this very concept. And of course, the concerns globally and where we are and where we are headed. Currently, of course, we are now still addressing the SDGs. And for us, of course, those of us are within the spheres of education. Our focus is on SDG number 4, which largely, of course, is to ensure that we all offer quality and inclusive education. So I want to really demonstrate how these SDGs fit into the 3 pillars of sustainability, just as we move along. And you will realize that in that diagram that I'm projecting, or that you can see on my screen, on top we have the concept of sustainable development, and then of course below that we have the three pillars of sustainable development, which is the society, the economy, and the environment. So largely, of course, other than institutional setting and partnerships, you'll see that all the other goals are actually aligned to those three pillars. So the concerns of the society can be handled under 6 sustainable development goals. And largely the concerns of the society under the social pillar, of course, include poverty. They include, of course, matters hunger, health and well-being, education, gender equality, water, and sanitation. Then under the economic pillar, the interest of this concept is actually, this pillar is to ensure that we have energy systems, there is work and economic growth, we have industry and infrastructure, inequalities well taken care of, sustainable cities, and then of course we have, a concern about consumption and production. Of course, under the environmental pillar, we have what we are now calling climate change. And from this, of course, we have now very current concepts on climate education, or what we are also calling green education, just to ensure that we really achieve this goal on climate change. Then we have water ecosystems and land ecosystems as well. So I think now you can make a very clear, of course, you can see how these are related. Remember when you are addressing the gaps in the MDGs, we said one of the major challenges was the lack of synergy, and this is how now the synergy has been addressed moving forward through the sustainable development goals. So, of course, as a brief to my mention in my previous slide is that this goes under society, prioritize satisfaction of the diversified needs of the population on matters food, on matters health, on matters education, which of course globally are what we call the most basic needs of the society. Of course, under the economic pillar, we want to promote improvements in the welfare of the populations. And here we want to take note of growth, maximization of profits, increasing competitiveness, and expanding markets for actually what we are producing as well. So that, of course, if we also get markets for what is locally available globally elsewhere, then of course we can say we have a wide, of course, we can witness growth of the production sector within our economy. Environment, of course, here the concern, of course, is on how the human activity, of course, are affecting the environment. And that is why here the discussion is about climate change, and this is to be addressed through climate education, or what we are calling green education, particularly on the issue of carbon emissions. So this is how these pillars, of course, now house the particular goals, and how each of the pillars is clearly linking to each of the specific goals to address a certain, of course, facet of the concept of sustainable development. So moving forward, under the environmental pillar, we have what we call the Green Growth Agenda. And on this one, the focus is on 5 core areas: energy, what we are now calling the green energy or renewable energy. And I think even Daktari mentioned this, even within the locomotive industry or even the transport industry. where now we have even manufacturers now coming in with electric vehicles and all that. Green minerals and manufacturing. So of course, when you're talking about taking care of the mother earth, we talk about green minerals, green manufacturing, green production, everything going green. Sustainable agricultural land, water, ocean use. That's why, of course, we have a concern about the hydro ecosystem as one of the goals to be addressed under SDGs, sustainable infrastructure and urbanization, as well as natural capital. So for us to achieve all this, there are two important cross-cutting levers. Of course, we have to adapt and be resilient to climate and mitigate, of course, the risks that come with this. We also have what we call climate financing and the carbon credits. So these are things that, of course, now we are throwing the spanner into the works. You still go back and try to also read further on what the green growth agenda entails. When we talk about carbon credits, green education or climate education, climate financing, all these are things that, of course, are now current, and you really need to dig deeper to understand what they are about. We also have what we call the Africa Climate Summits. We are now still in our journey, and under the African Climate Summit, which was a recent development, actually some 2 years ago. It happened in 2023. Of course, this one is an initiative, is a continental initiative, and Africa, of course, had to design and catalyze some of the actions and solutions for climate change, and especially because of the experiences that, of course, what sub-Saharan Africa would experience in terms of climatic hazards like heat, drought, flooding. And I think we have really witnessed this in the recent past. So of course, we have experienced heat waves, we've experienced periods of drought, and all of a sudden we have experienced actually flooding. So following this, of course, there was need to finance resilience actions to mitigate the climate hazards that, of course, were already affecting the African continent and largely affecting the 3 pillars of sustainable development, the society, the environment, and to a large extent, the economy. So here, of course, the resolution was also to drive a green growth agenda that sets bold ambitions, both for economic prosperity and climate action. So this is one of the recent developments, which was a continental effort towards sustainable development that just happened recently. And these were some of the concerns. I am now sure you are privy to some of these things. We'll talk about climatic hazards that have currently or that have in the recent past affected us. You can now clearly associate yourselves with matters flooding. I think just recently, of course, we experienced floods. There has been, of course, spells of drought, heat waves experienced, and all that. Even in this month, of course, there was some times back, as early as last week, and now this week we are also experiencing rains. And of course, in most parts of the country, we know that rains, we never experience rains this time of the year, or based on, of course, the climatic conditions of the country. But of course, we are experiencing weather patterns that are outside the norm of what has been. Of course, what has been actually the norm, and that's why we are saying outside the norm. Like, of course, experiencing dry spells when we expect rains, experiencing rains we don't expect rains, experiencing floods and drought and all that. So these are some of the recent experiences that, of course, led to the climate summit, Africa Climate Summit, and this is what was addressed during this particular convention. I would like at this point now, I would like to illustrate the green growth agenda, of course, that came out of this discussion. For Africa as a continent, with ambitions for up to 2030. So this agenda, the green growth agenda, of course, was an awakening to the African countries to ensure that they focus more on energy transition to what we call now renewable energy. So there was an appeal that, of course, now we make a shift to renewable energy, and of course now households, of course, were put to task to do what is known as even green, clean cooking using renewable energy. That now we do not go the direction of actually harvesting. Somebody kindly mute. Maureen, kindly mute. Maureen, kindly mute. So there was an appeal to even households at the level of the household to ensure that we use what we call clean cooking, that we don't continue harvesting firewood, we don't continue using charcoal, we don't continue burning our forests and all that. So green minerals manufacturing, and of course, here there was a concern about the green metals and biofuels as a big part of fuel to drive, of course, industrial processes. We had an appeal for sustainable agriculture, land and water, or even what you call the ocean use. So we still ensure that we have what you call zero deforestation. We also do agroforestry at scale, even on small farms at a person at an household level. Of course, we also had an appeal on sustainable infrastructure and urbanization, where now we were actually appealed as a continent to ensure that we have what we call green cities, green housing, and all this. So natural capital as well, of course, to ensure that land and marine land is conserved. We have biodiversity in terms of credits at scale, and then of course increase in nature-based tourism, blue carbon. All these are actually appeals to the African continent to drive the agenda of sustainable development at the level of a continent. So we were also requested, of course, countries, African countries, of course, had a resolve to adapt and be resilient to climate risk through ensuring that we have sustainable water management systems, and of course, national crop and drought insurance schemes, so that, of course, we still continue encouraging, of course, our local populace to ensure that they also grow crops. And in case this doesn't, of course, things that don't work out, then of course we can what you call drought insurance as a mitigation for this particular undertaking. We had also an appeal on climate financing and carbon credits, because these are some of the big steps big steps and still green areas that, of course, as a continent, we need to look into, so that we ensure that we are able to encourage, of course, our African populace to embrace aspects that would lead us to achieve the green growth agenda with a vision that by 2030, then of course we will have mitigated against some of the sustainable development risks that along the way we have come addressing as we discuss in the various conferences or even conventions that took place. I want to talk about our recent development as well, and this was what we called. Sorry, before that, we are coming to the close because it's already 7. What we call the African Climate Week, and this happened some time back in 2023, and this was to explore the ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It was actually a swift and coordinated action to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and what we call climate financing to unlock Africa's green energy potential and the fostering of climate resilient development. So all the efforts, of course, were centering on SDG number 13 on climate action and 17 for partnerships for all the goals. So this week, what we are calling the African Climate Week, which happened in 2023, of course, was because we believe as a continent, we can lead the discussion in giving, of course, climate solutions to the rest of the world. So Africa believed that, of course, it could take lead in, of course, advancing this discussion on green, on mitigating climate issues, climate change issues, even to the rest of the world. And as a result, of course, Maureen, kindly mute. So as a continent, yes, we are facing the climate impacts that have just been discussed at length in each of those conventions. But then, of course, there was a general, of course, feeling that as a continent, then we could also take a leading role in spearheading, of course, these discussions to the rest of the world. So colleagues, I think I indicated earlier that mine was largely a very informative session. And I've just taken you down the path of the historical background for this concept on sustainable development, majorly by looking at highlighting the major developments that have occurred before, and that continue, of course, helping us shape the concept of sustainable development. So I think I will stop sharing my screen and request that if we have any concerns from the participants, then of course you could raise them, and questions and compliments, then we are free to do all that. So Dr. Mwanza, over to you.
No error. No error.
Dr. Mwanza. We have an open forum now. Any concerns, any questions, any compliments, just to let us know how the session was, then of course we would really appreciate it. It was largely informative, and basically to draw us the historical path, so that even as you move along in the other sessions, then of course you could be able to really know where we are coming from and where we are headed. Tracy, do you have any remarks for this session, since I can see you on camera? Tracy, you have decided to disappear off. So then, in case we do not have any concerns for this session, I would like to invite again Dr. Mwanza to close for us the session, or even to make some remarks before we close. I know there is always a link for registration, just to capture those of us who have attended the class. Our IT, I know you are on top of things. You should be sharing that in the chat. So over to you, Dr. Mwanza, if you are still with us. In case you are not with us, then I think...
Hello?
Yes, Daktari. Yes. Daktari.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me, Kufilo?
Yeah, I can hear you, Daktari.
Thank you everyone for participating in this session. I think I don't have much to say, but just appreciate all of us for remaining throughout the session without dropping. And we want to wish you well. Hopefully, we'll meet you sometime in the future towards the end of the unit. God bless us all, and have a good evening, Alan, Elsie, George, and everyone else. Thank you, Sulu, for the wonderful session we have had.
Thank you, Dr. Mwanza, for your remarks, and I trust you are keeping well in Kakamega. We are also doing well over here, together with my colleagues. I want to thank our ICT team for ensuring that the session was seamless, and for the technical assistance in hosting and ensuring that the sessions went on well. However, we would like to maybe invite one of you maybe to share on how the session was, even as we wind up. Halan Toritich, because I can see the ICT is trying to tell us to be patient a while so that they can be able to share the link. Halan Toritich, you could unmute and then, of course, share with us. Halan Toritich, are you still with us? Halan is not able to. Paris? Hey, James, then you can speak on behalf of the members of your class. Seemingly, I don't know. They are muted. I don't know whether it's they can hear my communication from your end. But James, you could say, as from the participant perspective.
Okay, thank you, Bwana Mwalimu Martin Kisilu. So on behalf of today's class, I want to thank you, Bwana.
It's like Maureen, you are in the market and you are still in class from the look of things.
Okay, so I want to thank you, Bwana Kisilu, on behalf of the class, and Dr. Mwanza for a very good session, well presented, and I hope we are going to be meeting in the near future for more classes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, James, for your compliments, and for all of us, thank you very much for making time to be with us during this particular session. Our ICT has shared the link in the chat forum. So you could just go to the link and sign for your attendance for this particular class. All the best, and wish you a good evening. Asanteni sana.
Sasa wametuma link hapa ya registration na mimi sioni vile unajaza hiyo form. Link fulani hapa. Actually, that's the link, participant. That can fill it out. Sindio? Ema click. Biro maya.
Tumia Chrome, siko na Chrome.
Kwani haikuji? Hiyo form. WWF.
Ni uko nayo.
Ndio hii. Ni continue.
Ila anamaanisha usaini. Naingia tu basi.
Utanipea hiyo form. Because you are using sign in. Jamaa wao na kujini. Haikuji. Ikagiashia hapa. Nimeshana na. Unagokera na form donge.